Hey friends, thanks for taking time to listen in on a conversation Joe Sayward and I had about the 2026 Barcelona Grand Prix. Dick had to miss this one, so it was Joe and me on the call. Lewis Hamilton won in red, his first win for Ferrari, on a day a lot of people had stopped believing would come after a year of being told it was only ever the car. As you'll hear, I could not help being moved by it. Joe, who has spent more time in the paddock than almost anyone, spent the conversation gently refusing to call it a turning point. Whether Barcelona was the start of something for Hamilton and Ferrari, or a perfect afternoon the standings will quietly correct, may depend on who you ask. Before we get to our conversation though, I need to ask, can you help us out? If this show adds value to your F1 experience, please take a moment to follow us and give us 5 stars on your favorite podcast app. Share this episode with other F1 fans. That's how people find us, and it's how we keep growing this community. Hope you enjoy our conversation. Okay, well, Joe, it is the days after the Barcelona Grand Prix, and it looks like it's you and me today. Dick has had to unavoidably miss out on this conversation. I know that that's not easy for him, but we'll just have to keep going on.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it's unfortunate, but I'm sure we're quite capable of dealing with it on our own. So it was quite an interesting race. Obviously, everyone's very excited because Ferrari won, um, and it's a change. Whenever there's a change, people get excited about it. And it's Lewis's first win at Ferrari, and blah de blah. I mean, there were lots of things. He's the first British driver to win at Ferrari since Mansell, I think. And the podium was the first, this is the extraordinary statistic. The podium was the first all British 1, 2, 3 since 1968. And I thought that's really weird because I'm sure I was at 1 or 2 with full British podiums in the past, but obviously not. I must have just dreamed that up.
Yeah, I was really impressed by that.
Yeah, in the era of Schumacher, I suppose, there were lots of Brits, but Schumacher was always there or thereabouts, and I think he probably spoiled it a few times. But I thought, with Damon Hill and with David Coulthard and Johnny Herbert and all these guys, I thought I'm sure there was one somewhere, but I couldn't find one. So obviously there wasn't. I just imagined it.
So was that your race highlight, the fact that this was an all-British podium?
What was my race highlight? You have to say it's great to see Lewis coming back and winning in a Ferrari. It's his first win in a non-Mercedes engine car. What it does is it just says to the world, this Lewis Hamilton guy, he's not just a one-trick pony. He can do it in other teams as well. Very important point. Not that anyone really doubted that. I think the question was, for many people, including myself, to be fair, has he still got it? Is he not too old? And for a while last year when Charles was beating him, it was like sort of, oh, come on, Lewis, this isn't great. But he seems to have got it all together. He's much happier now. He's in a happy place, and it's good, and it's great for the sport because Lewis is a towering figure, and a Ferrari win is always good, even if you're not a Ferrari fan. A Ferrari win is always good because there are so many Ferrari fans in the world. So it's important. It'd be nice if they could win a championship, but let's not get carried away.
I think, yeah, for me, it was also Lewis's win. If anything, as I processed the race, I also just felt like it was a masterclass on so many levels of not just simply the technique, but it's also the mental aspect of it. You could just see after quali, he was buzzing, and there was a visible change in just his normal demeanor that day. And you just kept thinking, at least for me, I wonder what tomorrow is going to look like. And then to see how it unfolded, the champion that you had known to somehow resurge and present itself in the way that it did on Sunday was quite remarkable. And so for those who are newer, I think if you didn't understand what Lewis in that time of that peak at Mercedes especially, but I would even argue, I wasn't watching the sport when he was in McLaren, but I've watched old races. And you could just see there was something different of what was happening at Ferrari last year. So new fans to the sport don't have that context and appreciation that you do, Joe, of your experience of watching Lewis and knowing what could have been. And then I think for me, because I get so frustrated with sometimes social media drama and people devaluing what he has accomplished, and like you, I thought this is the Lewis that everyone needed to see, that he hasn't lost it and that it wasn't just simply the car, as I've seen people try to argue. And I just go, you clearly don't understand. And I'm not even a racer, and you don't understand what it takes to have accomplished what he did consistently at that level when the car was where he needed it to be. So to see now 2 races, I hear you being happy for him of winning, but you're not going overboard of thinking this could just be a complete overhaul change and Ferrari win through that. What keeps you measured on that? Why wouldn't you go that far?
Because in qualifying, the Mercedes was still ahead, you know, and the Mercedes is still a quick car. I think I can't back it up with much, but I just don't think Mercedes. I mean, George did have a problem at the end of the race. There was a wing change that went wrong, and therefore he was struggling with his car. Now he got overtaken by Kimi, but to be fair, I didn't think Kimi looked his normal self. He just didn't seem to be. I don't know. I saw before the race he looked tired, and I thought, that's you shouldn't be looking tired at this time in the season. It's these guys are super fit, all the rest of it. Maybe he's doing too much. Maybe because he keeps popping up everywhere. He's at MotoGP races. He's at I can't even remember all the places he's turned up, but he seems to be turning up everywhere. And I don't know who's looking after all his busy social schedule, but I think it might be a bit too much. Anyway, whatever. And the problem with these guys when they get tired is they also get sick. It's just one of the things that happens. And I know, I mean, I've traveled the Grand Prix circus for years and years and years. And when you've done it, a lot of times you become sort of immune to it. But if you're still new to it, you can get sick quite easily because it's just non-stop, non-stop, non-stop. And you don't sleep properly, you don't eat properly, all these things that are not good for you. You need to take those into account. And Kimi's, he's new to it. So quite often in the first year or second year, young drivers do get tired and they get sick. So I don't know, but there was something amiss, something not quite right about it. And then, of course, by the time he overtook George, it was too late. And then, the car blew up on him. So he ended up with nothing, which was pretty unfair given what he'd done over the weekend, but that's the way it is. It's the same with George in Canada. It is slightly alarming that Mercedes engine failures are happening as much as they are, because it's not just those two. It's also McLaren have had a whole bunch of stuff too. So, but we'll see. I'm not sure. It's a pivotal moment in world history. As some people would make it out to be. Inevitably, because everything in Formula One, certainly in social media, is what happened 5 minutes ago, and not taking a bigger picture. So we'll see how it goes. It was also very hot, and Mercedes don't traditionally work as well in hot weather. There are lots of other things to be taken into account, and we don't know all the answers. But I just didn't think it was a. The other thing is, and I don't think it made much difference in the overall scheme of things, but Lewis was very lucky on the virtual safety car. He gained a probably 4 or 5 seconds in that. And that's important for track position. Track position is often key because once you're behind somebody, trying to get past them is very difficult and messes up the tires and things like that. But I think the virtual safety car certainly helped him. I'm not sure he wouldn't have won anyway on his strategy, but it certainly helped him. But that's another thing. Sometimes the luck runs with the winners.
Yeah, I do think that the virtual safety car I think he was already on a trajectory to win. I think the virtual safety car just gave that extra cushion and protection that he needed to maintain that track position. But going back to what you said about Mercedes, I'm hearing you say that the reliability issue, because that's what I put down in my notes and even said that on the race notes, is I think that reliability may be Mercedes' Achilles heel. Do you think that's overstating it, or we have enough data to start leading us down that track of thinking, but more needs to happen?
Yes and no. I mean, obviously there have been a few failures. This is a new formula, therefore you expect some new failures. And if there are reliability issues, the regulations allow for changes to be made. That if they prove that it is a regulation, so a reliability issue, they can actually change it. So I don't think it's a major problem. The major problem is probably figuring out why it's happening. And it may be more than one reason. That's the other thing, you just never know. And so it's really the same of any kind of new championship, is that you always have failures because people are learning. And that's why, sometimes it's great to use the old machinery because everyone knows it doesn't break down, or it shouldn't do. And it's all quite close because everyone's developed as much as they can figure out how to develop. So, changing the rules majorly always spreads the field out. And it's sort of anti-show, if you know what I mean. I mean, you have to do it sometimes, obviously, to keep up with technology, although, the FIA president wants us all to go back to V8 with some bizarre idea that the past was better than the future, which is weird, but there you are. There are some things that are sensible in that need to be done. The cars should be smaller. Everything should be cheaper. But there are other ways of doing it. And you've got to have some relevance for the car manufacturers. You've got to give them something to make them stay. And they're very important because they pour a pile of money into the sport. And I think it is irresponsible to just say, well, the car manufacturers can get lost if they don't like it. I think you have to work with them to understand why they're there and what the sport can do for them.
Yeah. And I think that's something when we make sure that we do not overlook the fact that this ultimately is a business, and those are the incentives to make sure that the money flows inside the business. Let me ask you this about the George Kimi dynamic. There are people who were wondering if this race, as it was unfolding, if there should have been, or could have been team orders. I don't know that at this race, I think that team orders would have made sense. I think that if anything, letting them both race allowed them to kind of get this out of their system, that they needed that. And this is a early enough race, and there's enough time for the team's overall goal of winning the constructors that they could recover if there was anything. But both of them really want to prove that they are the one that the team should get behind. And I guess what I want to know is, if you were advising Mercedes, because I really couldn't come to a clean answer on this, if you were advising them, would you let, as it did, the race just play out, or would you have come in and said, hey, look, this is what we need to do? Because there were some moments where, especially if Kimi hadn't gone out with that DNF, where you were just wondering, could this end up where a loss of points for the team was going to happen because of fighting? Do you see where I'm kind of wondering, thinking?
But Mercedes has never had this policy, and rightly so, because they're sporting. They don't believe in supporting one driver or the other driver because they believe that the driver is just sorted out. Now, they've had a problem before when Lewis, Hamilton, and Nico Rosberg were colliding. And I don't know if you heard the stories that Nico Rosberg was telling about him being not literally fined for the damage, or they basically got billed for any damage that they caused. And Nico said he got billed like $330,000 for colliding with Lewis one time because that's the damage it caused. Now, he had a big think about it after that, and I think that's probably the way to do it.
Yeah.
Because declaring that one driver, it's like when Ferrari, everything was for Michael Schumacher. That's not very sporting. It's also very boring, by the way, for spectators, because you just know that if the Ferrari is the fastest car, Michael Schumacher will win because the other guy won't be allowed to. And that's just, it's not good. It's not sporting, and it's efficient. I had this fight years and years and years ago with Jean Todt, long before he was in Ferrari, and that was his policy. We were on the Paris Dakar Rally, and in the middle of the Sahara Desert, and Jean tossed a coin to decide which of his drivers would win. And I was there, and I went absolutely ballistic at him, and I just said, "You can't do that. That's not sporting." And he, taking offence, he said, "Yes, I can. I'm in charge, and my job is to get the best possible result for Peugeot." And I said, "That's true, but that's not how you do it, because winning by unsporting means, in other words, tossing a coin, and then the guy has to obey the team orders." And actually, that did happen. I'm trying to remember. I think if I remember correctly, Jackie Ickx won the Toyn Cross, and Ari Vatanen was the guy challenging for the victory. And on the last day after this, Ari Vatanen outdrove Ickx by a mile on the last stage, and then literally sat around waiting at the finishing line just to prove his point. Sort of drumming his fingers on the dashboard, going, "He's here somewhere. We're just waiting for him." And that's not good. So, and that was Jean's way of doing things, and fair enough, he was very successful. But I don't think it's very good for the sport. But as Jean said, my job is to win for Peugeot. Now, Toto and co have a different view on the way that sport should be, and I'm with them. I hate team orders. I always have done. Just like I hate balance of performance. It's just and I hate reverse grids and stuff like that, because it's just fake, and it's a gimmick, and it's crap, really.
Yeah, I have to agree with you on every count that you just said. Let me ask you this. Then if it's later in the season and it's obvious one driver is right there on the cusp, the other one isn't challenging. Like, I'm not seeing the same distinction of what we saw with Oscar and Lando last year. That was, if anything, I would say team orders are not good in that point, especially if the constructors has already been determined and the team is going to win. Letting those guys race makes sense to me. But what if there is a major gap? Like, for example, like with Max versus when Sergio was there, there's no question that the teammate is not able to accomplish and challenge. Do you still hold to that, thinking that team orders isn't necessary there, or is that the role of the second driver to help?
If the guy can't do it, he can't do it. So it's irrelevant. Sergio Perez was that particular year was so far behind all the time, it didn't matter. Therefore, team orders didn't come into it because he didn't step up, and that's usually the case. It's not that they can step up; they just can't. If you have a really big gap like that, the difficult bit is when you have two guys who are pretty much on the same level. And then you get difficulties, and we've seen that in the past, like Senna and Prost at McLaren in the 80s, and Piquet and Mansell at Williams in the 80s. The same kind of thing. They're very much the same level, and then it gets, or in those days, it got nasty, and they played dirty, And this is what you want to try and avoid. And, some people think, well, a real champion in Formula One, a Formula One champion, will always be a bit dodgy around the edges if he has to be. I don't agree with that. I think that there are class drivers who don't have to be dirty to win, and I hope we never have people driving into one another like happened in the old days, because it's just it undervalues the sport. It undervalues the championship if they win, and so. I think it's just best to let them fight it out, and the fastest guy, or the luckiest guy sometimes, will win. And that's really how it should be.
Yeah. Well, going back to what you said, Nico had said about the provision in there about covering the damage, I do think that's a clever way of a team holding them accountable for their actions and letting them, as they do in any of their decision making as a driver, they ultimately have to do the calculations of, is this risk worth the cost and to receive the benefit? They're doing that literally as they're driving around and making decisions of overtakes. But here they know, if I do this, this may happen. Do I want to take that risk? And I think that it holds to what you just so sagely said, the sporting aspect of the sport. This is what we as fans are looking forward to. We do want to see the two drivers on a team of the best car duking it out, but we do want to see it happen cleanly and fairly. We will know intuitively if there's someone's putting either the coin toss or a finger on the scale of directing where it goes. So I appreciate you kind of unpacking that a little bit.
I think you also have to look at the characters of the people. Toto Wolff is somebody who knows, he's a very good businessman, but he's a sportsman too. He knows that the value of doing it properly. And, he might be very, very clever, and he might do all kinds of things to make sure that Mercedes gets the best possible shot. But when it comes to the guys out on the track, I think he's absolutely fair. And I'm sure after the race, he would probably have had a word with I don't know, with the pair of them, or just with Kimi, I don't know, about what happened at the end. I don't know if there were, it's possible that they say, because Kimi said, I can go much faster on the radio. I can go faster than this. He's holding him up. Now, if there were team orders applied, Toto would say, if he felt it was a valid argument, he would say to George, look, Kimi's faster. Just let him go, because that might enable him to catch Lewis. Now, they didn't say that. Now, that's either because they didn't think Kimi was faster, or they knew that George had a problem and Kimi didn't. So I don't know. But generally speaking, it's not the way they operate. And I think that's really important. And it's good for the sport. I really think that, you should just let people get on with it. I understand the other arguments, but I don't like them.
And you're allowed to feel that way. If anything, it just shows the difference in culture and ethos of a team, which is also something interesting to analyze and see how that plays out on the track and how that actually applies into the business of the sport itself. So then moving on actually to another team, McLaren, they did have notably last year the papaya rules and all that, but I don't want to actually go into that. I wrote in my notes that I didn't really glean enough about McLaren's race and like even their philosophy to actually understand what their results were on track. And so I wanted to see if you had any thoughts. It just seemed they were not where I thought they would be for Barcelona. I expected more of them. It's just, even though Lando got onto the podium, I feel like it was a lot of other issues that got them there. Now, Lando, I think, did a great job. I think that he made the call of either choosing to push and battle. He knew enough in that race to say, I'd rather position myself well to see where the front of the field landed. And I think it worked well for him to take that more calculated approach. But ultimately, like when we talk about Barcelona, it was a lot about the development of the car that I was anticipating. And I wondered what your thoughts were. But when it comes to McLaren.
Well, my thought is, again, it goes back to my previous thought about Mercedes not performing as well as they should, because McLaren was close at the end, and they haven't been so far, really, not in the races. So Lando was about, I think, at the end, 5 seconds behind or something like that, which was really close. And I think that's an indication, there weren't many upgrades. I mean, when you look through the whole field, Ferrari had a bunch of upgrades, but most people just had circuit-specific upgrades. But Ferrari had a whole bunch of stuff, including a new floor and all the rest of it. So you can understand how they may have stepped up. But in terms of where McLaren is in their development process, they're still behind Mercedes, and yet they got a lot closer than I expected. So that's why I think Mercedes, one of the reasons I think Mercedes underperformed is that McLaren was closer than you would expect it to be.
Okay. Well, that's interesting to hear you say it, to say that you think that they were closer. I'm now have to process that because that's not definitely what I felt, but I don't discount what you're saying at all. So then going back to Ferrari, do you think that the win that Lewis executed was on their pace alone, or do you think that they had more that they could have done at Ferrari?
No, I think that was absolutely what they could do. And Lewis, once Lewis has got the bit between his teeth and the wind in his sails, he is formidable. But there's only so far you can push a car. So I don't think he was saving anything up at all.
Yeah.
I think at the end when he pulled out a lead, I think he was just pulling out the lead at the end, one, because they were fading away, and two, just for the fun of it. Just like Kimi did whenever it was when he set the fastest lap on the last lap. He was trying to do that in Monaco as well, but it was in Canada he did that. And it's just like, sort of, look at me, this is, I'm under control here. I'm going to win this, and I'm going to win it in style. And I think that's probably a little bit what Lewis was doing too. And, for Lewis, it's a massive, massive relief more than anything else, to be honest, because, when you have the amount of criticism, he said it himself. He said, you hear the voices, even if you don't want to, you hear the voices and you react to them because it's human to react to them. You doubt yourself. Am I too old? All these questions that other people say, which they have a right to say in a way if it's not unfair. And it's tough because sometimes these guys think to themselves, well, are they right? Are my critics right? And if you don't listen to the world around you, it's also a bad idea as well, in my opinion, anyway. So no, I think what we saw was terrific. I thought Lewis drove really well. He did a great job, and the car was quick enough.
Yeah, I think all of the above. I agree with you. If anything, I talked about that in my race notes, is that just the ability that you could see he has been able to achieve at least that one goal of making this transition, which is to win in Ferrari red. And all the naysayers over this last year, I've watched and just wondered, and it personally inspired me because I think all of us do have to balance what you just said. How much do you listen to others and how much do you believe in yourself? And you have to have a level of self-awareness and intellectual honesty. And that's got to be very hard on such a public level that he has to operate, is that if you go too far of ignoring everything everybody says, you can put yourself into a very bad position of hubris and arrogance. But then on the other side, when you're being attacked, where people may think that they're saying the right thing, but it's not delivered in a way that it's with goodwill. It's very obvious to the recipient and they're going to close off. And that can make them become super defensive and go down a spiral or, again, bristle up. And you could see that potential was there. And I think that the timing of this win, like you said, the car was where it needed to be. He was in the good headspace. It was a track that he loves. All of that came together. And I'm looking forward to seeing if this can continue to hold on all counts for him.
I think this is something that people should be aware of. This will have raised expectations. Now, are those expectations going to be, because once you have high expectations, you have disappointment. And it may be that we just saw a collection of things that made the Ferrari able to win in Spain, and it won't be happening the same way in Austria. For example,
very true.
In Austria, she looked back over time. Red Bull has always been terrific around Austria. So maybe we'll have something weird, and the Red Bull will be suddenly out of nowhere.
Yeah.
Because there is always this circuit specificity. It's a good word, there, isn't it? This specificity of circuits where some cars go better than others, and you have to understand that. And there's it's to do with the underlying fundamentals of a chassis. Some are good at one kind of track and some are good at others. And the skill is to get one that's more or less good at all of them. And that's really difficult. And so I think it's a little bit early to get carried away and start waving the flag. And I thought Toto was being a bit silly, saying we got to watch out because Lewis might be challenging us for the world championship. Yeah, right. I don't see that. But this time last year we were going about how Piastri was going to win by a mile, and he didn't.
Right.
Just have to wait and see how things develop. And it's I know it's not what people on social media want to hear. Like, you just got to wait and see and be patient. There aren't any easy answers. But that's the truth of it. There aren't any easy answers because things change every minute.
Right.
And, right now, as we're talking, there are people beavering away in all kinds of laboratories and test benches and all kinds of stuff, trying to find that little bit extra that'll make the difference. And, that's what, it's Formula One is a moving target in every respect. Every element of it is moving. It's like the most complicated gearbox you've ever seen. Everything's moving in different directions. And then once every fortnight, it all comes together and you get a result. And, sometimes the result isn't reflective of what's going on either. You've just got to take it for what it is, which is it's a great sport. It's great entertainment, and just enjoy it is the way I look at it anyway.
Yeah, I do agree with you that the design specificity, as you said, of the circuit, it is often undervalued. That is one of the biggest challenges that the team has to have, of how general, because you don't want it so general that it's not competitive. But then, there are going to be certain places that it's going to thrive and others where it's going to struggle. And how do you do that in conjunction with everything else? That design philosophy actually plays out quite a bit, which leads me to actually talking about Austria and Red Bull and its history of doing well. What do you think? Did this race show us any improvement or any pullback on the development side of it? It seemed like Max was expecting this to be like a test of the car, but did it give us the answers to know where Red Bull is sitting?
Pretty much, yeah.
What did you draw away then when you say pretty much?
Because Barcelona has always been a track where the car is judged more than the drivers. It's always been that way. And if nobody makes any mistakes, as I said in a recent podcast, the grid is team by team. And it wasn't quite the case this time because there were people making mistakes down the grid. But if you look at it, the framework of that concept, it was there nonetheless. And you just see exactly how good the car is compared to the other cars, because Barcelona tests every element of a car. So if you're particularly good or bad or whatever, but that's always been the way. It's always that was. If you ask me why that's the case, I couldn't possibly explain it, but I'm sure there are very clever engineers who can.
But so what did you take away for Red Bull from this race?
Nothing really. I thought it was a very nothing kind of race, really. They were there or thereabouts, and it wasn't nothing really.
Yeah. I think I was surprised to see that they weren't further up. I mean, I enjoyed Isaac's performance. I thought his driving was not what I was expecting. That assertiveness that I kept seeing throughout the race was, wow, okay, that's great. But overall, looking at the car, watching Max, I was really surprised. I thought that they would be further up and more competitive with the rest of the group. Was that a surprise to you? Did you draw those same conclusions?
No, the thing is that all of the earlier tracks have quirks. There are things about them where it works for one, it doesn't work for another. And I think we've said it on a couple of occasions, well, let's go and see what happens in Barcelona, because then you really find out where things are. And I think what we did was we found out where things were. And then the ultimate irony is, of course, that the FIA on the Aduo question, which is basically we're balancing everything out. The FIA has concluded that the Red Bull is the best engine. and therefore that becomes the standard by which everyone else is judged. So Red Bull are not allowed any upgrades, and Mercedes is getting an upgrade. Now, how the hell does that work? I know the answer to this, but I know why I can see the logic to it, but it's just it's illogical logic, if you can have such a thing.
Well, yeah, I know we discussed that, I think during our last race review, how they came to this and why in theory, it makes sense, but it doesn't make sense when you look at it in actual practice and looking at it comprehensively. Okay, well, so then what about the middle of the pack? I know in the JSBM you talked about Alonso and Alpine. I wondered if you wanted to talk about Alpine's performance itself, maybe even Pierre's reinstatement in the Monaco podium. What are your thoughts about any of that?
Well, the Monaco podium is an impossible situation. The stewards were given a situation where it was clearly unfair that Pierre got the penalty. It was clearly unfair to 3 or 4 others who had had the same problem, but they served their penalties. And so to let Pierre get the place back, yes, that's fair on the one hand, but when you're being fair on the one hand, you're being unfair on 3 or 4 other accounts. Now, one might argue that the best thing to do would be to do nothing and be unfair to everybody. Which is, I think, if I was a steward, being a steward is really interesting. I haven't been a steward, but I have been. The FIA held some training courses for stewards every year in Geneva, and I went along to one of those and took part in it, and to see what they were learning. Actually, Laurent Mekies was at the FIA at that point and running it, and he invited me along. He said, so you can understand how difficult it is to be a steward. And I absolutely learned it's really difficult to be a steward, because you're bound by what appear to be facts, and you're bound by the rules. And there's a lot of things you can't decide upon. And in this particular case, you had to decide to be fair. Well, you had to decide to be unfair or unfair, which is mad. But my view on that would be unfair to everybody, and that's fairer. So to give Pierre the place back doesn't fully make sense, but I understand why they did it. Now that's all still rolling on, because now we got a whole bunch of other appeals going on from the others who are saying, well, hang on a minute, this isn't fair. And it's quite right. It's not fair. And it's a bad precedent too, because if you have a situation where you let teams ignore penalties on the basis that they can argue about it afterwards, that's not good either. So, Pierre got away with it because he didn't have to serve his penalty. Because if you stop in a pit stop and you have a time penalty, you have to serve your penalty then. But I just think the whole thing was a mess. It shouldn't have been a mess. The measurements shouldn't have been wrong, but they were. And while you can blame people and say, well, this is not right, sure, it's not right, but then you've got to decide how to fix the problem. And I think it's better to be unfair to everybody rather than being unfair to only 3 of the 4 or 4 of the 5, whatever. So that's a matter of style, opinion, and the 4 stewards who sat there and decided this.
Okay, so for me, I thought, why not just, I know it's a bit controversial, but talking about being unfair, what if the race result was just removed from consideration? I mean, obviously it happened, but you just nulled that race. And I saw your face.
Championship, that is, you can't just say, well, this race didn't happen, because it did. And you can't just sort of say, well, we'll annul it, because that's not fair to Kimi, who won the race in Monaco. It's not fair to anybody to annul the race. It's also not good it's just not good, full stop. So you've got to have a set of rules that are work properly. And if you get into situations like this, you've got to be fair about it. And I think that by trying to be fair, they ended up being unfair.
Right. I guess what I'm saying is go the extreme of it's not fair
That's
to
way too
anybody.
extreme.
Yeah.
Way too.
Yeah. Like I think of it because it seems there's so many variables, so many things tangled up with one another that trying to pull out one is definitely unfair. I guess I also wonder who should really ultimately have to bear the blame of this and have egg on their face, because this is their responsibility, I think, is the governance aspect of this. Who is putting on the race and ensuring that the system works so that all of us who are watching this and enjoying this and supporting this should have a confidence that the technical aspect of this has been actually maintained and protected, so that way we can have the trust in the results, and that the underlying things that the stewards are making the decisions on are also properly there. Do you see what I'm saying? Like, if you're going to do it, like it, I would rather be controversial in a way that is unfair to everybody. But I hear you if my thoughts are too extreme.
I think that, look, the fact of the matter is that it was the mistake made by a subcontractor to the FIA, which is Formula One management, and they only do the timekeeping because they have this electronic ring around the circuit which monitors everything for the TV, the sound, everything. And it's just more logical and more practical for them to do it. Now, they should do that properly, and they made a mistake. But also, let's face it, the FIA should be on it to make sure they don't make mistakes. So who is the blame? I think, I mean, you're the lawyer here, but I think in a court of law, the subcontractor would take the blame unless, I think, if I remember correctly, the law says something like, unless the person who is overseeing the whole thing knew about it, and therefore, I don't know if that was the case or not. I doubt it, because if you knew about it, you would have fixed it. But the fact is that in the end, it's either one or the other or both, and it honestly doesn't matter, because it was just a screw up and everybody is impacted by it. So the best thing to do is say, and this is what Formula One management said, we won't let it happen again. Great. Yeah. Shouldn't have happened the first time, but it did. It just makes the whole sport look rather amateur, I think. And that's not good. But it's the same thing. You can argue the same thing about the track coming up in Monaco. That shouldn't have happened either. And, who's responsible for that? Well, there's the Automobile Club of Monaco, there's the government of Monaco, there's some contractor who mixed the concrete up or whatever, the tarmac up, the bitumen. There's a million different words all meaning the same thing, fundamentally. But, at the end of the day, it is somebody has to be responsible for it. And in that particular case, it's to do with safety, and my view on that is that the FIA's job is to fix that. So, that's what they're supposed to do. They are the regulatory body. So, yes, somebody else probably didn't do it right, but they should have done. And so we have kind of two things which are dissimilar and similar at the same time. But I still think at the end of the day, when you look at what happened, I think it would have been fairer just to say, it's unfair for everybody, and not to give Pierre. The other thing is, Pierre wouldn't have been third if the others hadn't been penalised. That's the other key point. He made he did a great job. He should get an Oscar for that performance, to be honest. About how he was heartbroken, and this was he struggled and fought for the podium, he blah blah blah. Yeah, right. He was lucky to be there, and so. And that's what they do. The drivers play the games. You hear George is good at that too. He's the guy who's always sort of weeping to the stewards on the radio, saying that he did this wrong, he did that wrong. In England, we would say he's a sneak, or I think Americans would call him a snitch, wouldn't you? But but it's part of the game, and they all do it. They say something to their engineer, knowing that the FIA will probably be listening into the conversation, and if they haven't spotted something, that they will, okay, yeah. And it's like footballers falling over and lying on the ground, so injured for 10 minutes, and then suddenly getting up and running around, no problem. just when they're trying to achieve a certain result. So it's all a bit silly, really. But I think I understand what the stewards decided. I just think it would have been wiser to be unfair, to be fair.
Yeah. I don't disagree with really anything you're saying. If anything, I'm just maybe going a little bit further. But I think that I am just disappointed on both sides of this, the track aspect of it, and then also on the timekeeping. I do think, going back to what you said about contractor, subcontractor, the notice was there because they had already talked to the teams about being mindful of this. So that to me makes me believe that there is enough there that you should have had more oversight. I would love to see the evidence that was presented to see. I have certain suspicions that I think that it's not in right now in anyone's best interest to talk about it too much more than what's already being there, because it's all being still appealed and, like, until there's a final conclusion to this. But it is what it is. And like you said, I don't think that the sport looks good. I think especially for it happening of all places, Monaco, where I feel like outside of motorsport, it's the one time the world pays really attention to Formula One. It just doesn't look good, and I don't like it as a fan. Going back to Alonso.
Well, Alonso looked like a broken man going into the weekend, and it was an appalling weekend for Aston Martin. It was a shocker. Absolutely everything was horrible. I think, the rumours are that Alonso is going to go to Alpine, and that makes perfect sense to me. I think he will, and I think they'll give him a 1+1 deal, and he'll pay him a load of money, and he'll be a great ambassador for Gucci, and everyone will be happy because he'll be back with the same gang he's worked with before. So, and he's been to Enstone like 3 times already, because his career is longer than War and Peace, So, it's got more chapters to it than War and Peace, anyway. So I think it's also a way of ending your career on a high as opposed to going out on a low, which Aston Martin might get better next year if the whole thing holds together. But I just think it's a wiser move from him at his age. He's 45 in the next few weeks. And he said it himself. I'm not really. I probably won't be back at Barcelona again. Because Barcelona misses a race next year, of course, because it's in alternation with the Belgian Grand Prix. So I think I can see that happening, and he'll be very good. He's still good. We don't know how good, because a couple of years at Aston Martin at that time in your career might have done more damage than people think. It's like when Vettel left Aston Martin and when Alonso got in the car. Alonso was much quicker than Vettel had been, because Vettel had been, it just sort of drifted off into nowhere, But I think I think that will happen. So, and I think it's probably a good thing for all concerned.
So then what about Franco in this? I know that we thought, especially, I think it was Miami, there seemed to be a resurge. And then I wondered when we saw in race Franco being asked to give way to Pierre, it just made me kind of wonder what's going on there. Is that literally Pierre's doing better? Or do you think some of this plays into Alonso and the wings?
I think that Franco, when he arrived at Williams, he looked very good for a few races. And then he started crashing just as
Jack Doohan?
No, not Jack Doohan. Oh dear me. The American he replaced. I'm sorry, my brain's gone.
Oh, Logan Sargent?
Logan Sargent, yes.
Oh.
Okay. He just started doing the same things that Logan had been doing, which was crashing. But for a few races, he looked very good. And then, Alpine paid a lot of money to get him out of a Williams contract and put him in. And I think he's been, I'm not saying he's been disastrous, because he hasn't. He's been okay. But okay is not enough. In Formula One, you've got to be better than okay. And I think that there's an awful lot of pressure on him, which probably hasn't helped. But, he seems to have soaked that up pretty well. But I'm not sure he's got all the necessary bits that make a star. And he's had a lot of time now to prove it. Even if you're in a bad car, you can still do things that people go, oh, that's interesting. It's when somebody's in a bad car, you see them at their best, I've always found. And sometimes you don't notice because they're obviously not on camera, they're not in the focus. But sometimes people do things in bad cars and you think, wow, that was impressive. And I think there's been a little bit lacking in wow factor. Now, that may upset Franco's multitudinous fans who are very vocal in their support of him. But, that is, if you look at the reality of the situation, you can see how, and let's face it, Flavio Briatore doesn't give a toss about what the fans think about anything. He just wants to get the best things together that he can get together. It's not always the best team, by the way. Sometimes it's making more money and things like that. But that is at the moment he needs to have a really good team. More than having the money, because obviously the arrival of Gucci is going to be a big financial bonus for the team. And Fernando is a former world champion, admittedly 1,000 years ago, but he was a double world champion. And Pierre Gasly's not a double world champion; he's won one race. Franco's won nothing. So, on paper, having Fernando Alonso, who is a long-established star in Formula One in your team, is a good thing. And if he's still delivering, all the better. And if he's doing as good a job, if Franco and he do the same kind of job, he's still more value because he has all that in the bag with him. It's a bit like the argument about if your drivers are the same speed as one another, the one who speaks 4 languages is more valuable than the one who doesn't speak 4 languages. It's that kind of thinking. Now, obviously, Briatore thinks that, or we'll see if it actually happens, but I would imagine that he will take Alonso for that reason, because it's not going to be any worse than Franco, probably. Might be better, and there's a lot more bonuses.
Yeah. Well, as you were talking, it made me think that Mercedes and Alpine, when you look at the drivers, not necessarily performance, but you think about the marketing or the business side of it, both Mercedes and Alpine have more similarities in my mind at the moment, in the sense that you have Kimi and you have Franco, who came in the same class, essentially, into the grid. And then you have Pierre and George, who are also essentially peers. And then you have Lewis and Fernando, who are essentially peers, like all kind of those generationals. And if the analysis were the same, if Kimi wasn't doing as great as he was, and the opportunity to bring back Lewis presented itself, I think Mercedes, assuming like not human politics, but just looking at the paper, you could make the same argument you just did about the value of bringing back a previous multi-year champion to your team as he wants to end his career. If you've got someone who is proven, and that's where probably the parallel breaks, where George is a proven multi-race winner versus Pierre, but the talent and the ability to stay on the grid as long as either one of them have is similar. And so I think, unfortunately for Franco, his results are not whatever they have set as expectations are not meeting. So here's the option for the business to bring in the multi-year champion, and you're not able to hold up against that because you're not delivering on the potential that they had expected for you.
I don't think that if you look at what Alpine did to Jack Doohan, that wasn't fair, because Jack Doohan was never given a proper chance to show
Agreed.
what he could do. But I think Franco's had enough time. They've been very fair with him. I think that Williams I mean, the Williams were fair with him up to a point. I mean, they gave him the drive, and then they moved on from him. But they sold his contract to Briatore, who wanted it, and got a lot of money off him too. So I think everyone's been fair to him. I just think you've got to. Formula One's about delivering, and if you don't deliver enough, even if your fans think you've delivered enough, it doesn't matter if the people in the business making the decision don't. I mean, believe me, Formula One would love to have Franco Colapinto and a Grand Prix in Argentina. It would be fantastic. Another race in South America would be great. Now, there's all kinds of reasons why that might not happen, and certainly without Franco, it's going to be very difficult for that to happen. But these kind of decisions nowadays, that doesn't decide. We wanted a Chinese driver. Guan Yu Zhou had a lot of time in the car. He was able to do a certain amount, but that didn't affect the race. It probably brought a few more people in, maybe. Usually that's what happens. But China has been on the Formula One calendar for 20 odd years now. It's hard to imagine, but that is actually true. But Argentina, it's been a very long time. I did go to some Argentine Grand Prix. I can't remember which years they were. I guess it was in the 90s. And they were great. They were. I mean, the track was out of date and all the rest of it, but they were good events and they were very popular. But again, if you can't pay for it, why should there be a race?
Yeah. Well, so I'm looking at the time, so I want to make sure we don't overlook the rest of the grid. I wonder what your thoughts are on Racing Bulls or Haas or Williams. Their days, because of what we were seeing at the front of the field, I feel like it wasn't so obvious what the day looked like for those teams. What are your takeaways of any of them?
Racing Bulls did a great job. And Haas, I mean, you've got to take into account that with all the things going on, there were points up for grabs that aren't usually up for grabs, because Charles wasn't there, and in the end, Kimi wasn't there. So there were points there that were to be grabbed. Now, but Racing Bulls did a very good job all weekend, and that car is obviously good, and they are improving it. They've got some very good engineers there. Haas is smaller, and struggles more because it's small. And Williams were very keen to point out from the very beginning of the weekend they didn't expect their car to be very good there, and it wasn't. So, if your car's no good, there's a lot of things that still need to be done to the Williams. There's still weight to be lost. I think also that's part of the thing with the Red Bull too. I think the Red Bull's probably a bit overweight as well. But that's a race gives you a snapshot of where you are on a certain track on a certain day. And I think what we saw is pretty much where everybody is, how completely useless Aston Martin was, how still far away from the pace Cadillac was, and the rest of it is just, boom, 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 boom.
And what did you think about Audi and Nico's unfortunate incident of the rock hitting the kill switch?
Well, it's certainly bizarre, but they weren't really massively competitive. But that's kind of where they're at as well. So I don't think we actually learned a huge amount. It just sort of confirmed things we've suspected more than anything, and now we just go through the season and we'll see, how things play out from race to race, and also from upgrade to upgrade, because that is still a point whereby new stuff comes. Aston Martin are promising it sounds like almost a new car at some point in July. I don't know if they'll make it for the summer break or not before, but and maybe we'll see them suddenly being in the midfield where they should be. But I don't know if that's going to happen or not. We'll see. They certainly aren't wasting any upgrade money on it. They're clearly putting everything into whatever they're doing. So a B version of the car, whether the B version of the car has the same chassis, I don't know. We'll see.
So, if you're a new fan and you're watching this Grand Prix, what would you say is the thing that they should understand from watching the race, or the key takeaway that they should have had?
I think the thing, if you are a completely new fan, is my favorite word again, specificity of a track to different cars. Some people don't know that. If you're a beginner, racing is track specific. One car works better on one circuit than it does on another. Simple. And added to that, you also have, I'm not sure it's so true nowadays, but still exists, which is some drivers like some tracks more than others, and some drivers don't like some tracks. So they tend to perform better on the ones they like. And so there are, there's all kinds of elements to it that it's not just the same every week. It might have looked like it for the first 6 races, but actually it wasn't. If you look at it closely, there were ups and downs, and it just so happened that Mercedes won all of them. Now Ferrari has won one. Now the thing I'd say is, don't think this is the sort of beginning of a new regime, because I'm not sure it is. But I might be wrong, and that's the other thing about it, is that you can listen to the voices, the observers, and they can say this is the Ferrari's renaissance, and they might be right, it might be wrong, it might be luck. But at the end of the day, nobody really knows until you get there and do it, And that, I think, is something that we can all learn from, really, which is, just to take it and enjoy it for what it is, and we can analyze it later. But can we predict the future? No, we can't.
Yeah, I agree with a lot of what you just said. If anything, I love the idea of what you said. If you start to look into the details, you can see that it's not literally the same thing happening over. It's like opening up the hood and realizing that there's so much more complexity that has happened at each of these races, even if the ultimate result seems to be the same, and that there can be some signs of what could potentially happen, but we also know that there are too many variables that happen at any given race that you can't truly forecast. It's like weather forecasting. They have a lot of good data that they can say this is what is likely to happen, but if you ever took a weather forecast from the weather person and said this is what I'm like 100% certain, you're being a little foolish, because they can't literally predict the future. I think for me, if I were talking to a new fan, which I know many of our listeners are, is that I think that Barcelona is a driver's circuit and a strategy circuit, and this year showed that. If you watched and you felt lost when the cars look a little bit slower, but then they came ahead, I think that was a lot to do with the strategy of the teams, because I think they have so much data that they have from this specific track. And that's part of the reason why I think it's a great, as you noted, Joe, a great place to size up where everybody is, that snapshot, and that the drivers, I think, seem to like it. It seemed like they were enjoying this circuit. And so that puts them into a great place to let the team do what it needs to do. It's like a level of confidence, I think, that everyone has because they've been there. And this is where they can kind of measure themselves. And that puts you in a really great headspace to then think strategically, to think outside the box, to use experience or lack of experience and try to figure out where are the gaps. And so that's why I think I always look forward to this race. I am disappointed that it's going to be alternated, but it is what it is, and that's what the calendar will be. And hopefully there'll be other places where we can see this type of activity.
Just one thought, and that is, it probably isn't immediately obvious, but Barcelona is actually more predictable race than any other, including Monaco. If you look back in history, more I think it's only 3 drivers in 36 years who weren't on the front row who won. It's always the front row, and that's way more than Monaco. Monaco,
Yeah.
the percentage of pole to victory is higher than any other circuit. Why? That's a good question. But it's probably because it's a car, it's a circuit that values the car more than the driver.
Yeah.
Where Monaco actually values the driver more than the car.
Yeah.
So that's an extraordinary element to it. But it also means you can have some very dull races at Barcelona too,
Yeah.
because things don't change. Anyway, there you are.
Yeah. Oh, I love that data point because maybe that's one of the reasons I do like Barcelona, because I do feel like it does favor the car. And because of that, the value of the team gets to shine a little bit more, the strategy, the setup. How are they predicting and working well with the driver? Like, it's like that's the platform for the driver then to truly shine or be called out in some ways, like if they can or cannot produce the results that are needed if the car is in a good place. And I love how that, when you talk about that in comparison to Monaco, and for them to have it happen consecutively, that also is a really cool way to see, is the driver's talent matched up with where a car, and vice versa, as a car matched up with the driver's talent. So I'm really glad you pulled out that data point. So next up is Austria. Anything you're looking forward to on that race?
I think traditionally Max and Red Bull have done very well there, and I mean it's a super track. It's simple, it's always good action, and it'll be really interesting to see what happens. I can see Red Bull being a little bit better than they have been in recent races, but again, we don't know. So this is why I love Formula One, because it is unpredictable. Even when it's being predictable, it's unpredictable. So
Yes.
it may not be obvious, but if you dig beneath the surface just a little bit, you find out that actually everyone is different and everyone is interesting. And I never, ever, ever get bored watching races.
Yes. I
Because
agree.
I'm always looking at all the different things going on. I do a thing called a lap chart. I don't know if you've encountered lap charting, but lap charts are where you write down the numbers when people come by every lap. And that way you follow everything. And at the end of the race, you know exactly what happened to everybody. You don't know all the reasons why things happened. I'm just trying to look and see if I've got one at hand, but I don't at the moment. I have one that's not filled out, but basically it's a grid and you just write down the numbers. But there's all kinds of little annotations that tell you. And so I'm always fascinated by races, even if on TV. So the more you get into it, the more fascinated you become. That's, I think,
Yes. I wholeheartedly agree. And that's one of the many reasons I enjoy not only the JSBM, but your insights and your willingness to have these conversations, because I feel like a kindredness with you on that I enjoy getting down into the gritty details and thinking through what are the threads that might not be obvious. It's just a wonderful sport. And if anything, Joe, I look forward to our next conversation. Okay, friends, what did you think of our conversation? Drop me a line via email, Sabrina@2guysaGirlandF1.com. Can you help us out? If you haven't already, please take a moment to follow us and give us 5 stars on your favorite podcast app, as well as share this episode with other F1 fans. We know our growth is because of you, and the guys and I thank you. And with that, let me say, we'll keep talking and you can keep listening in, because we're just 2 guys, a girl, and F1. For John, Dick, and me, Sabrina, thanks for listening.